and welcome to another episode of All That Film. Hello and welcome to another episode of All That Film. This episode we will be talking about Will Smith movies. It's a little bit different because I'm not joined with any host today, so it'll be a rather quick episode and not as edited as usual. So we'll get right into movie news. I only had 3 items to discuss. First, A Quiet Place was moved up to 2020, which is interesting because the first A Quiet Place came out in 2018. I believe this means the studio has a lot of faith in this sequel. It'll be even bigger and hopefully capture audiences like the first one. I know Cillian Murphy was added to the cast. I don't know if they're keeping Emily Blunt on, but it looks to be interesting to say the least. I don't know if I like this idea of all these original movies, they have to have a sequel. I know they're still working on a Baby Driver sequel, and that's just a movie that, it's fine on its own. Like, it had a definitive story. I don't know if that's the case with A Quiet Place, but we'll definitely see. The second piece of news was something that hit the internet. So for whatever reason, Captain Marvel has become a bit of a controversy with nerds on the internet, wanting her to smile or, oh, she's too powerful. All these dumb things. And if you're talking about the context of like her being written, then I can sort of see an argument. But the way people word, oh, well, why can Captain Marvel beat Thanos? Because of the fact she's a woman, for whatever reason, this is a talking point. And it shouldn't be because, Captain Marvel's cool. But what came out was that there's a deleted scene where the trucker that's like, oh, you should smile more. Brie Larson, or Captain Marvel, actually beats him up. And tons of people were like, oh, I can't believe a superhero like this would do such a thing. And I didn't even realize, this isn't even a scene in the movie that they're reacting to. It's literally a deleted scene that they're referring to. It's not in the movie. This is something that got cut. And people are overreacting oh, I can't believe she do something like this. Not my superheroes. My superheroes are nice to people. And I don't know. There's just tons of stuff that, this is nonsensical. Captain Marvel's fun. It's just, an action, fun superhero movie that there shouldn't be any of this discussion. And Brie Larson's pretty good. But last piece of news, and my favorite piece of news, Bong Joon-ho took home the Palme d'Or at Cannes Film Festival. For Parasite. It's a film I'm very excited for. It was good to see Korean cinema, shown more in the public. Obviously, this is a French film festival, but still people will hear about this and it'll create good buzz. So hopefully, fingers crossed, it gets a wide release this fall because I'd love to support Mr. Joon-ho. But yeah, it even beat Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which was huge, so good win for Korean cinema today. But we'll move on to a topic, Pitch Me a Movie. This week we're talking Will Smith movies. So I was sort of thinking how to cast Will Smith in a role. Obviously he's had more of a little bit of a down spiral since his heyday where he was peak charismatic, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the pitch I actually want to make, I think Will Smith would be really fun in Kingsman. And specifically, I think Matthew Vaughn could touch Will Smith the way he needs. I don't think you cast Will Smith with a Wes Anderson or PTA or Coen Brothers because I don't think he works in that context. I think Will Smith is going to stay Will Smith, and there's nothing you can do about that. So you want someone to play to his strengths, and I think Matthew Vaughn could do that. Cast Will Smith more as a mentor role or a competitive role. Obviously, Channing Tatum was sort of in this role in Kingsman 2, but then weird storylines and the Golden Circle was a major disappointment. So I think Will Smith could help out with Kingsman 3 or 4. And obviously, he's not going to be in that because nothing has been announced. But it would just be a good casting choice for Matthew Vaughn. With that said, we'll move right into Will Smith talk and get jiggy with it, as I've been saying this whole week. Got that song stuck in my head. Will Smith is an interesting actor. He started on Fresh Prince. He's really great on Fresh Prince as a TV actor, or in the sitcom era. He showed a lot of range in that respect. I think his turning point was when he did Bad Boys Obviously, that sort of put him on the map. But then he had Independence Day and Men in Black, two huge movies, and those were all back 1995, I believe, and 96, 97. Which was interesting for him, to see him as an action star and see that rise of the Smith. In Independence Day, he's fun. I haven't seen Bad Boys yet, but I've heard it's quite good, and Martin Lawrence is funny. Men in Black, I think, is the best Will Smith performance we've had for what Will Smith is. And I think Will Smith is just a charismatic guy who's good at making jokes but can also play the lead man, which is kind of hard to do. And there's other films like Wild Wild West, he's doing that, and it's not as successful. Men in Black 2 isn't as good. And then, his more serious roles are interesting to see the turn he takes. Obviously, Enemy of State, I, Robot, Ali, those types of films he did are him going more in like, oh, hey, I'm a serious action star. So no more jokes in these. And I haven't seen Ali. I've heard he's pretty good. I keep saying pretty good. I need to quit that. But definitely a role I'd like to see maybe more of. I don't know. This is interesting because Will Smith did Concussion, and that sort of was a flop that no one talked about in that, it was supposed to propel him to the Oscars. But it didn't quite get that praise that it needed. Speaking of not getting praise it needed, Will Smith was in Shark Tale. An interesting turn for Will Smith to be in an animated movie. This was a little bit of a lull in his career because he was still working on all cylinders. He took a little bit of a down spiral with Shark Tale. I don't know. It's fine. It's a little memey, but there's nothing wrong with that. After that, there's Will Smith sort of mid-tier movies, at least for me. Hitch, which is a really fun rom-com, a good premise. Kevin James, surprisingly, is fun. Pursuit of Happiness, which is really good. Will Smith giving the best acting performance. I say that because I said Men in Black is the best Will Smith performance, because Will Smith, and I don't say this as a negative, Will Smith isn't necessarily an actor. He's more of like the Bruce Willis type, if that makes sense. Like Bruce Willis in Die Hard isn't really acting. He's just showing charisma. If everyone's following, like John Wick or Keanu in John Wick, he's not necessarily acting per se. He's more just being a charismatic action star that we can all follow. But I think Pursuit of Happiness, he gives an amazing performance. I cried in Pursuit of Happiness. It's a pretty emotional movie. Lots of fun, based on a true story. And for that type of movie, I think it's in the upper tier of biopics. I Am Legend, which I'm a fan of 2/3 of the way through. It's definitely an interesting project that Smith picked up. And it showed a lot more silence and him sort of talking to himself or a dog. And it worked really well for those 2/3. Hancock, and speaking of 2/3, another film that 2/3 of the way through, I love this movie. The last third isn't that good, but I think his chemistry with Jason Bateman is really solid, and I think that's things he needs to focus on. Because with Hancock, he's able to sort of be this lazy, I don't want to be a superhero type guy, but he works with Jason Bateman's straight man performance well to where they can both do their own thing and complement each other. 7 Pounds, another sort of serious Will Smith performance. My girlfriend's favorite. He's solid. It's a solid movie. It's not necessarily one that I remember off the top of my head as Will Smith movies. It's got a couple people in it that are more famous now, like Woody. And then here's sort of where we see a downturn. Men in Black 3 obviously was fun. That's fine. But After Earth is probably on M. Night Shyamalan. You have this actor that is so charismatic, so fun, so goofy in a lot of movies, and you decide to put him in a world where, oh, hey, there's no emotion. You can't show emotion, which was odd, like very odd of a choice. Other than that, we have Focus, Concussion, just a couple things that didn't necessarily capture audiences again, like I mentioned. Suicide Squad, which I don't think is Will Smith's fault. I think if you go back on that movie and you're Will Smith and you think, oh, I could be in a DC superhero movie, a franchise, and you see the success of Marvel and you're wanting to get in on this DC one and you see the pitch of Suicide Squad. Everyone on the pitch of Suicide Squad was like, oh, this will be fun. This is a nice change of pace. So I don't think that's on him. I think he would make a really good Deadshot if there was a different director, writer, different team on that. And then Collateral Beauty, weird movie from what I've heard. Like, definitely nothing like the trailers they pitched. But another, like, Will Smith, like, just... And I think he's going back to it, is the good part. I think he's turning back up. But Bright, a movie I still haven't seen. There's actually surprisingly a small cult for this movie of people that think it's quite fun. It's just like a take of a modern day, like, real society, Lord of the Rings fantasy type story, with an orc as a cop. I wasn't too interested. There was not really a good reception behind it, but there's enough people that sort of really dig this movie that I might end up checking it out. Hopefully it's not terrible. And then we get to where Will Smith is sort of having what I think is a renaissance, or a return to form, I guess. I think he's really good in Aladdin. I'll get to my full thoughts on Aladdin in a second, but he just gives a solid performance that you want to see from Will Smith. I think Spies in Disguise, that's a good pick of a movie for Will Smith. It's goofy, it's fun, it's not it's not Shark Tale level goofy, but Will Smith as a pigeon, like, I'm sort of interested in that. If someone else was playing the pigeon, maybe not. Gemini Man, I'm hesitantly interested. I like Ang Lee, I like Will Smith, I like the premise. Hopefully it turns into a great movie, but we'll have to wait and see. And then Bright 2, which, I'm not too excited for. And Bad Boys I haven't seen. I'll probably watch the first two before seeing Bad Boys for Life. But he's got 2 Bad Boys movies planned. So it'll be interesting to see where Will Smith goes. I hope he sort of realizes, like, he can do more now. He can be sort of like a goofy father figure and maybe take a step back. He doesn't have to be like this lead performance. So with all that said, I'll move straight into Aladdin spoilers. So if you haven't seen Aladdin 2019, directed by director Guy Ritchie. Directed by Guy Ritchie, then don't listen to this. Or if you don't care about the remake because it's just a remake, you know what happens. Then I'm going to get right into it. As mentioned, Will Smith is great. He gives a terrific comedic performance. He breathes life into this movie. Thankfully, it was exhausting in the first act. They try to tie in all these different characters that don't matter at all. There's Dahlia, who's just bad. Like, she thinks that she doesn't know what a princess does, and she's been her right-hand assistant for the longest time. They tie in this character, Hakeem, who, like, has one line that's like, oh, you're a street rat, Aladdin. That's all you'll ever be. And it's a really harsh line for a kids movie. It was kind of funny. There's moments that I kept laughing at the movie, not laughing with it, if that makes sense. And for that, I think it's quite enjoyable in a weird way. Jafar's bad. That actor that's playing him isn't very good. I don't know if it's what they're asking of him or it's the acting performance, because I think with Mina Masood and Naomi Scott, which I mentioned in my review, I think both of them have something, which is not something I can say for the rest of the cast. I think they're bad actors. But I think those two are well cast and a good decision. So whoever was the casting director, solid call. The problem is I think they're directed poorly and the action around them isn't really paced, to make that moment of a whole new world feel powerful. Like, the film doesn't focus on that. I like the moments when the two of them are getting to know each other in the city. However, the problem is, for a majority of it, or for a little less than majority, it's poorly written. So when you get to that whole new world, powerful scene, it just doesn't feel right. The songs that they add in this also don't feel right. Every time, you see a character sort of longingly staring into the distance, it's like, oh, they're about to go to a song that I don't know. And nothing really captured me. The added song that Jasmine sings felt like a Kelly Clarkson music video. It's a real interesting choice to include that in a scene that really has no effect on the actual story. Because, you have Princess Jasmine having this powerful moment. And in premise, I like that. I like having, this revisionist, like, oh, hey, like, when we go back, let's have these princesses do more. Because, Jasmine is sort of a little bit of a damsel in the first movie. Aladdin has to break her out of the hourglass. Funny enough, the animators actually were going to have her break herself out, but animation would have cost more, capitalism screwing it over, so they didn't do it. But anyway, they ended up having her be more of a powerful force in this. Obviously, like, there's more of an emphasis on she wants to be the king, or whatever the title is. I forget what it is, but... and that's interesting, but I don't think the film earns that. Naomi Scott, again, encapsulates sort of a more powerful performance. But that's not really the focus that I wanted to go on. And that's where they spend their extra 30 minutes of the Aladdin movie, because they have to add something, which I think it could have been more fun just seeing Aladdin and Genie hang out. I think Mina Masood is probably his best when he's with Will Smith, as he's sort of playing the straight man off Will Smith's zany and, again, electric performance. Like, it's lots of fun. Friend Like Me is just as good as the first one, I think. And Prince Ali is lots of fun. I don't think Will Smith is singing throughout the whole thing, which leads to a pretty funny dub. I wouldn't necessarily say dub. He mouths it well, but it just didn't feel like his voice or something auto-tune or some sort of changing was done to his voice. But there's not really anything here that, like, there's a scene with Jam that's bad. Like, Aladdin says, I brought these to buy you. And in another movie where it's set like, oh, hey, this is meant to be cringe humor. Because I think there's part of me that thinks that that's what Guy Ritchie was doing, but it just didn't land the way it was delivered, or something was just terribly off with that scene if that's what they were going for. And there's just a lot of that. And there's a great dance montage right after that. That's lots of fun. But then, I don't know, there's just tons of different moments where every time this film picks something to do right, it trips over itself. And that's the way I can describe this, as it's sort of weird that a remake, because I think Jungle Book is very safe. Cinderella is very safe. Beauty and the Beast is very safe. I don't necessarily think if Aladdin's safe. Obviously, it's safe in story. But I don't think this was the cookie cutter movie that I expected. There was a good Genie performance. There was interesting dance sequences, and then there were lots of bad moments that didn't go as expected. So at least this movie took chances. I'll give it sort of credit, but again, I'm not too fond of the movie. I'm getting an interesting word of mouth from this from friends of mine. There's a lot of people that liked it. I posted somewhere, I was like, oh, I'm not really like too fond of this, and a lot of people were like, what? It's so fun. And I can see that. Obviously, I gave it a 4 out of 10, leaning towards a 3. But I can see people really enjoying this if you're fond of the original movie and the songs and just are more keen to a live-action version, then I can understand that. So that pretty much wraps up the Aladdin and Will Smith talk. It'll, again, be interesting to see where Will Smith goes. Hopefully, he goes back to that fun Hancock, Independence Day, Men in Black type role. But it could be interesting, and what I'd like to see more of is that he's a mentor type person. And he aims to be more of a supporting role, like he is in Aladdin. He's not the main person. Obviously, he's the star of the show, but he's not the main player, which is something I think is more fitting towards Smith's skills at this point. I don't think he's a leading man. We'll see in Gemini Man. It's a movie that interests me. But that about wraps it up for Will Smith talk. So I guess I'll finish it with some recommends. I'm trying to think of what I've been consuming. Oh, I just saw this great documentary. It's called Too Funny to Fail. It's starring Dana Carvey. and it's about the Dana Carvey show and how the Dana Carvey show was canceled. It's really funny if you've never seen the Dana Carvey show. I'd seen probably 1 or 2 sketches that were in there. So it's funny to see all of them sort of in context of like how they pitched them, what they were about, all that stuff. And it's really interesting to see Steve Carell, Stephen Colbert getting their starting point. Also Robert Schmeigel. I think the film sort of brushes aside Louis C.K.'s involvement, which is sort of weird to have that. I mean, you can't revise it, but it does a good job to not focus on his involvement in it. And funny enough, I'm watching this documentary the whole time. Obviously, Dana Carvey, big SNL guy. And I'm thinking the whole time, I'm like, wow, like he definitely influenced Bill Hader. And then Bill Hader pops up and he's like, yeah, this is my biggest influence. So it's just a really fun documentary. If you like that stuff, if you like seeing sort of where these characters came from, just all that stuff. So that about wraps it up for this week. Thank you for listening. Next week, we will have reviews for Rocketman, Godzilla, King of Monsters, and Ma. We'll have a new segment of Mubi Monday, where we talk about films released on Mubi and review them. We'll talk more about that in the video. For Throwback Thursday, we'll have something Godzilla related. I don't want to spoil it. And then for Foreign Film Friday, we'll have Wandering Earth. And then that leads to Monday podcast episode that is completely unrelated. And that we'll be talking Game of Thrones. So just full review of Game of Thrones, all the seasons, all the characters. Just sort of sharing our thoughts. I wanted to do this a week after because it didn't feel right to go straight from the week that Game of Thrones finishes to, oh, hey, now you have to share your thoughts. So I wanted people to sort of sit on it, think about it, sort of weigh their opinions on where they fall on Game of Thrones as a whole. So that'll be next week. We might talk about Godzilla a little bit more, but it'll mostly be Game of Thrones. So check that out if you're a big GOT fan, and that's another episode of All That Film. Bye!